Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. In a move that many said wouldn't come at all, but many more said was only a matter of time, the Supreme Court has essentially killed the 1965 Voting Rights Act. In a 6-3 decision on Louisiana versus Calais, they upheld the decision to bar Louisiana from using a newly drawn electoral map that gave a second majority black voting district to the state. This new map having been drawn as a response to a map drawn in 2022 that left only one majority black voting district in the entire state, despite the fact that black voters make up about a third of that state's entire population. I actually talked about this map and the fight to get it in an episode a few months ago. A group of, quote, non-African American voters then argued that that map was unconstitutional because it violated the Equal Protection Clause by sorting voters based on race. And the decision yesterday essentially agreed, saying that race-based redistricting was unconstitutional, essentially opening the door for states to redraw their maps to undo many of the redrawn maps that favored previously disenfranchised minority groups. And as soon as the ruling was handed down, that's what many Republican states scrambled to do, essentially making it so that a young minority voter today is going to have less of a voice than their parents' or grandparents' generation did. In their seeming desire to prevent racial discrimination in redistricting, they essentially allowed there to be discrimination even more so. The reason maps like the 2024 Louisiana map had to be drawn in the first place was because there were groups that were being underrepresented based on the way the maps were drawn already. The fact that those underrepresented groups were based on race was almost inevitable, but that was part of the problem. And by now forbidding the institution of new voting maps based upon allowing these groups to have more equal representation, they're only making the problem worse. It's a step backwards, not forwards. Conservative states aren't going to openly say they're going to redraw their maps to favor white conservatives, but that's exactly what they're going to do by undoing the gains that minorities have made in having on the electoral maps. And that's not an accident. Republicans know that they cannot win without cheating, and this is simply allowing them to do so without any repercussion. Minority voters have long been known to vote more progressively, so this is essentially ensuring that their voices will be minimized or not heard at all, so that Republicans and conservatives can make more gains and solidify their grip on power for decades to come. This decision really feels like a slap in the face to minority voters and everyone that fought to get the Voting Rights Act passed all the way back in 1965. What feels almost worse is that this is clearly the culmination of a long-held desire for Chief Justice John Roberts. Even all the way back in the Reagan days, Roberts argued that the Voting Rights Act went beyond the Constitution in Section 2 because it regulated practices that merely resulted in racial disparities, and later argued in Shelby County versus Holder that things have changed in the South, and he concluded that extraordinary federal oversight was no longer necessary or justified. The result of that decision was that numerous states enacted restrictive voting laws, redrew their districts, and altered procedures in ways that disproportionately affected minority voters. Since they couldn't simply get rid of the Voting Rights Act, hollowing it out to a point of basically non-functionality was the next best thing, and John Roberts is pretty happy about having finally achieved his goal after decades of planning and work. I feel John Roberts' assertion that things have changed in the South was untrue in 2013 when he said it, and only more so now. The South here in the United States is incredibly racist. That was true in the 1960s, that was true in 2013, and it's true now. To deny that is to close your eyes to reality. In the eyes of people like John Roberts, the fact that minorities are allowed to vote at all should be good enough, ignoring entirely that those votes are then redistricted out of relevancy. The reality is that decisions like this encourage racially motivated discrimination under the guise of preventing it. Maps like the one in Louisiana from 2024 weren't redrawn to give minorities an unfair advantage over whites. It was because the unfair advantage was already there by whites, and it was simply to give minorities more of a chance. So in a way, the Supreme Court has taken away minorities' votes without literally taking away their votes. Chief Justice John Roberts said in 2005, "The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race." Yet with his decision here, that's exactly what he's allowing. Minorities are going to be discriminated against on the basis of their race because they will now be in voting districts that no longer represent them. Not properly representing minority racial groups is discrimination against them. But John Roberts and the other conservative Supreme Court justices don't seem to see it that way. But it's hard not to see this decision as a win for racists, a win for racism, and a win for racial discrimination. States like Mississippi and Tennessee are already taking steps to eliminate majority black voting districts. I don't know about you, but making it so that only the white voices make the decisions in those states' politics and electing those states' officials sounds pretty racist to me. Decisions by the Supreme Court, like Louisiana versus Calais or Shelby versus Holder, really seem to miss the entire purpose of the Voting Rights Act in specific, and really the civil rights movement in general. They saw an unfair system and made it so that minorities could rise up to have their own equal place at the decision-making table. While we maybe haven't gone back to the days of whites-only lunch counters and water fountains, this is essentially turning elections into something that are decided by whites only in many places in this country. Places, not coincidentally, that used to be the hotbeds of racism and racial discrimination in the days before civil rights. Despite what John Roberts said, racism is alive and well in the South, and he's essentially legitimized it for them when it comes to electoral maps and deciding on representation for the populations of those states. When the news broke about the 6-3 decision, I couldn't help but be pretty despondent at the news. This felt like the near complete dismantling of so many hard-won victories. Those who fought so hard for the Voting Rights Act and everything that it protected were probably spitting in their graves, knowing that their work was now for nothing. Their grandchildren would now experience the same kind of voter disenfranchisement that they did, except now in a world that knows better but let it happen anyway. It left me feeling just sad and angry because I knew that the conservatives and the white supremacists would be doing victory laps over this because they finally got what they wanted and they could eliminate those black votes as soon as possible. They could not wait to completely erase decades of racial progress and minority voices going back to being silenced. And of course, as soon as the news broke, the online discourse was all about who to blame for this. Was it Mitch McConnell for blocking Obama's Supreme Court nomination of Merrick Garland? Was it Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg for not retiring when she had the chance and allowing Obama to nominate a new liberal judge to take her place? Was it President Obama's fault for not packing the court while he had the chance? Or was it President Biden's fault for not packing the court when he had the chance? There were a lot of fingers to be pointed. I'm not convinced any of them truly and singularly point to how we got to this truly tragic decision. And in some ways, it almost doesn't matter which of those, if any, or all, resulted in this, because we're here now and we now have to deal with the fallout of what is instead of what could have been had things been different. Yes, Ruth Bader Ginsburg should have retired instead of being obsessed with her position and her legacy, which ended up allowing a conservative judge to replace her instead of a liberal one. But I think even if she had, and a liberal judge had succeeded her, this would, instead of being a 6-3 decision, would have come down to a 5-4, and it would still have gone down exactly as it has. It's often very tempting to feel how one small change could have made all the difference, but in this case, I honestly don't feel like it would have. Yes, a slightly less conservative-leaning court and one additional liberal judge could have made a difference in other cases, but in this case, I don't feel like it would have made the difference and changed the outcome. I think understandably, a lot of people see this decision and think, okay, now what? If we don't want to see this country become a sea of red ruled by a sea of white, what's the next step? So I'm saying the only solution is aggressive gerrymandering on the left. Make states like California and New York entirely blue to counteract the states that are now going to go entirely red. A sort of fight fire with fire approach as the only way to counteract what's been done. And while I feel generally when you start fighting fire with fire, all that ensures is that everybody gets burned, I'm honestly not sure I can see any better solution. Even if it does feel like we're getting dangerously close to a Union Confederate Confederacy divide where we have essentially two warring nations instead of one United States. I'm not a huge fan of gerrymandering, especially extreme gerrymandering, but while it remains a tool on the table, if the right is going to use it as a tool of discrimination, the left has no choice but to then take up that same arm and fight back with it. And that sadly may just have to be the way it is. Honestly, the Supreme Court justices that voted in favor of this decision, which I suppose is the entirety of the conservative side of the court, should be ashamed for the amount of pain their decision is going to put upon minorities in this country. But I suppose if they had any shame or any desire to help minorities, they wouldn't have voted the way they did in the first place. But I suppose if there's one takeaway, is that as bad as this decision is, and as awful as the effect will be, all is not lost. If there's one lesson American history has taught us, that even though it doesn't always feel like it, good usually wins in the end, and progress continues. Even though the white nationalist agenda feels that this is a battle that they have won, in the end the war will not be won by them. Inclusivity, diversity, those are the things this country is truly about, and those are the things that will eventually win out in the end. They may try to silence or at the very least quiet those voices, but they will not be silenced. Too many have fought and died for that to ever happen again. Yes, the decision in Louisiana versus Calais feels like a real step backwards. In a lot of ways it is, but it doesn't mean that we won't now step forward again and ensure that everyone in this country, regardless of race or creed, will have their voices represented and heard equally. And they can all have a government that speaks for them and not against them, because ultimately that's what America has always been about. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time when I cut you off, another Slice of News. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find it.